So the flight got delayed last night because we were all supposed to fly to Tulsa and bus back together. But their flight got delayed to 10, so they didn't get in until 2 in the morning, and then they slept for 4 hours, and now they're back at the airport trying to catch their next flight. The second half of the group.
That's why if I go somewhere on vacation, I have to have like some wiggle room in the schedule, because if you pack your schedule too tight, like it can mess up your whole trip if it gets messed up at the start.
We're always like an hour early for everything because my mom's very nervous about these kinds of things. My dad doesn't care. He will get there like 5 minutes before.
Oh yeah.
Well, there was like a 12-hour period there that we thought we were either going to be stuck in Munich till Thursday. We were either going to go to New York or we were either going to go to, we were going to stay in Athens. And
Yeah.
It was just like, it was funny. Everyone was like,
hired on Facebook, so I saw some of that stuff.
oh yeah, I think if we were with a different chaperone, we'd get lost, but she got us. I got back home around 1. Some people are
Oh, we said that we might move to
Fonte.
I just told him I was trying to put on the stay on Thursday. We might just have to make it up or
but we had 2 days in a row. I don't want to do it. That's all I know.
Do y'all know there's like a multiple choice?
there's like 8 usually.
Oh my god, I feel like the last one. Oh my god, do you get to choose that first one?
How many multiple choice questions are like unactual? We had to do
I know Dr. Grissom doesn't have like
It's just
Okay, I'm not really sure why our bells have been turned off, but it appears they are still turned off. So, welcome back. I hope you all had a nice break, a good first day back yesterday. So, quick little reminder about where we landed before spring break, and then what that's going to look like here the next few classes at least. So before spring break, we did section 3.3, which was over change of base again, and expanding and condensing logarithms. And then we spent quite a bit of time on 3.4. There was a really long book assignment, and that was on solving equations. And we probably could have pushed and done if you remember, we did one 50-point test over sections 1.9, 3.1, and 3.2, and the other 50 points were going to come from this. So we probably could have pressed on and gotten that squeezed in right before spring break, but it was going to be a little bit tight. So instead, we spent a little more time on 3.3. Things were a little bit more relaxed before spring break because we were going to take care of it when we came back from spring break. One change that we have made since I've seen you, because I've told you all of that before, but our plan was to come back and review and then do the 50-point test the second class, so that would be Thursday. We have changed that to where now we're going to review same stuff that we did before spring break with another practice quiz. That is the number 97 y'all picked up. But instead of the 50-point test being next class, it will just be a quiz. So I don't know, 25 points-ish, but it will be a minor grade instead of the 50-point major grade. So we're going to do that first, and then we will review and do the 50-point test. So we're stretching it out a little bit more. So be that much less we get to before the end of the year, but it should make this a little bit smoother for you. So today's handout, if you would please number it as 97, and since honestly the assignment's pretty short, and it's short enough that I'd like to give you time to do it and go over all of it. I realize that you might be a little bit rusty unless you made yourself review before you came back, which would not be the majority of the people. But honestly, about half of the assignment really needs to be you putting in some study time. So after we do this practice quiz, if you realize, man, I really just don't remember expanding and condensing very well, you probably need to look back at 92, 93. 92 where we did the notes, and 93 where you practiced it some, and maybe redo some of that. If it's the equations and you realize you're just not up to where you need to be, then you might need to look at the notes where we kind of did it step by step, handout 94. Maybe look at your book assignment again. I certainly encouraged you to mark up the questions that you were missing in the book assignment so that you had a quick reference when you came back from spring break and you didn't have to start from square one. And maybe even the first practice quiz. So, that's a little bit more independent. You guys are going to know where you stand after the practice quiz. But to get going here, if you do the first 6 questions, the first 6 are on change of base and expanding and condensing. They're a bit quicker, so I'll give you enough time to do those. We'll go over them, go over the answers, make sure that you get a chance to ask clarifying questions. Then I'll give you another chunk of time for the last 6, which are solving equations, and I'll have to give you a bigger chunk of time for that. And then you should at least know where you stand as far as the quiz goes. And then when I put the agenda back up, you can see some of the handouts and things that I recommend that you look over depending on which questions you miss here. Let me give everybody another 4 minutes here to try to get caught up. 4 minutes, we'll go over those first 6. Alright, let's see how you did on these 6. And then, of course, you should make some corrections and highlight the questions you didn't remember, because if you didn't remember them for today, there's a good chance you may not remember them for Thursday's quiz. Okay, so question 1 was the only one about change of base, and change of base is mostly about putting this in a calculator, how to do that if your calculator doesn't let you change the base to a 5, or if you don't know how to do that. So that would be like if you wanted to know what this graph looks like and you didn't remember it, this would be how you would put it in your calculator to graph. So your calculator can do base 10. So this is equal to this. These two things are equal. Or your calculator can do base E, so that is fine too. Now, if this was the way it was phrased on the quiz and the test, I would take either one. But if it happens to be multiple choice, which I honestly don't know, I'm not like giving you any unfair information here. But if it's multiple choice, we may list it this way. So if you only memorize that direction, then you could miss the question. You need to make sure that you understand both. Okay, and then 2 through 6 were about expanding and condensing. So there's really only 2 ways to expand, 2 ways to condense, and of course there's always a little bit of stuff as far as like how your answer needs to look and things like that. So question number 2 is not too bad, except you had to consider changing the square root to an exponent of a half. Because if you have an exponent on something that you're taking the log of, the exponent can come down out front. And then one of 2 ways to expand is division expands as subtraction. So you have a log base b of x minus a log base b of y. X first because it's in the numerator, y second because it's in the denominator. And of course you either need to distribute this 1/2 or you need parentheses, one or the other. Make sure that you don't just put the 1/2 with the first part.
Same thing, please.
Okay, skipping to question 4, because this is the opposite of that. Expanding division expands into subtraction. So if you are condensing subtraction, it's going to condense into division. So they have to be logs of the same type. And because we know what 54 divided by 9 is, we could change that to what? 6. And does log base 3 of 6 equal 2? No. Be careful, it's not multiplication. So this is some weird decimal, so let's not try to go further with that. So subtraction condenses to division. The only other way to condense is addition condenses with multiplication. However, in question 3, you needed to get this 5 and this 3 out of the way before you can condense. You don't want to condense and then hope that you put the 5 in the right spot and the 3 in the right spot. So 90% of the time with logarithms, you bring these exponents down, but occasionally, like these, you want to bring them up as exponents. Oops, so that was really it. Addition condenses to multiplication, but you had to know how to deal with the 3 and the 5. So,
Is that supposed to be a 2?
yes, it's supposed to be a 2.
Do you need the parentheses on that one?
Not really. It's just that if you don't put it, it might look like you're doing the log of this and then outside of that multiplying by this. So I don't know. It's just a little safer to say make sure you're taking the log of all that. Alright, and then number 5, this might be the same one as on practice quiz 1, except it was multiple choice, and it may even be the same as one we did in the notes. But this one is kind of the classic example, what used to show up on the ACT quite a bit. So we've already talked about division can expand as subtraction, but this expands more because these two are being multiplied, so we can also expand those with addition. So it's testing both of those things, but also And again, I'm not really sure why this has become the norm because it doesn't really change much. But when you're going this direction, you're doing the opposite. So the exponent should come down out front. And by far the most common mistake, so I'm sure this choice was on one of the wrong answers, it was one of the distractors, is you have to be careful with your parentheses here. This was minus all of this, so when you expand it, it's still minus all of this. It's not just all of a sudden minus the first term. It's minus the whole thing. So you can either do that with parentheses or you need to distribute. Both are perfectly fine, but if you have this be a minus and that be a plus, that is not the same thing. Now, I have not emphasized this too much before the break because we focus more on just getting in a lot of practice. But on a quiz or a test where you're going for accuracy over quantity of questions, remember that these are just opposite processes. So if you finished your quiz, you finished your test, and you still got 15-20 minutes before you have to turn it in, what you could do is you could force yourself to take your answer, condense it, and if it doesn't give you this, then something's wrong. Now, it could be that you're not condensing it correctly, but if you think you're condensing it correctly and it doesn't give you this, then you would at least know to try something different, or at least maybe know something about your answer to change. So, and I feel like if you can get those, the number 6 should be no problem because it's just kind of a combination of these. But to condense this, I need this 3 up out of the way, the 2 up out of the way. Subtraction condenses to division. X cubed was first, so it's the numerator. X minus 3 squared is second, so it's the denominator. Now, for this handout, this is the extent of questions that are change of base, expanding, and condensing. So, is there any follow-up questions you guys would like to ask on 1 through 6? Did you remember that pretty well, or not so much? Is okay? Okay. All right, then to finish up, go ahead and try the 6 equations. So same thing. Again, this is no risk practice quiz. No need to get out your notes. Just go ahead and see where you're at. If you don't think you know how to do a question, but you think you know the first couple steps, do the first couple steps. And I will reset our timer here, and I'll give you just a little bit more time than I did on the first 6 because these are a little bit longer and take more thought. So, but then we'll check those. I will tell you the one assignment I'd like you to turn in before Wednesday, in case you want to turn it in early, and then you will have the rest of the class to study and or ask me specific questions if you know what you need help with. for another 5 minutes. So let's go ahead and check your work and give you some tips about some stuff you may not have thought about. One thing to keep in mind is some of these questions you can sometimes get an answer that looks different that is still okay. So if I end up getting something different or doing something different than you did, you should probably copy it out to the side. But I don't know that I would erase your work, and I'll remind you how you can check your answers if your answer looks different to mine to make sure that it's okay. So it's going to seem a little random, but I want to skip question 7 till the end here because the other questions have quite a bit of repetition to them. So first off, for 8 through 12, I want you to see that many of these questions should be able to do a step or two at least that have nothing to do with logarithms. So in number 8, there should be nothing stopping you from undoing the plus 12 and undoing the times 2. That has nothing to do with logarithms. We'll come back and finish it. In question number 9, you could multiply both sides by 1 plus e to the negative x, and that is an improvement because at least you don't have fractions now. And then there's a few different things that you could do. You could distribute the 2, or you could just divide both sides by 2, and you could undo a plus 1 with a minus 1. Lots of stuff that can be done without logarithms. Question number 10, you do need at least one step of logarithm. Again, we'll come back and finish these, but I'm just trying to highlight some of the similarities. To do anything in 10, you do have to start off with logarithms, and expanding and condensing occasionally show up where they're helpful, except for solving equations. This is really the reason that we take time out to learn how to expand and condense, so that we can solve more equations. So, since we just did this on the other side, subtraction condenses into division. That had to be your first step. Now, again, I've not looked at the exact quiz and or test questions, so I'm not giving you any unfair information here, but I'd be very surprised if you didn't have at least one of these on your quiz and at least one on your test. Okay, and then along the same patterns here, number 11, you could have at least divided both sides by 4. So, other than question 10, I've done about half the work, had nothing to do with logarithms. So, you kind of have to get past that part. Now, to go back and finish these questions, I want you to see that all 5 of these, 8 through 12, have a similar technique in them, and I'm going to mark them with a star here. If you have something in exponential form, switching it to logarithmic form was almost always a good idea. Now, you don't have to change log base e into natural log. That's what everybody else is going to do, so it's not a bad habit to get in. But if you leave it this way, I'm not going to take off points on the test. But if you consider switching the form, all you have to finish with is undo times 2 with divide 2. So switching the form was important in question 8. Number 9, same thing. This is exponential form. This is completely optional, but you guys, in my experience, students tend to switch the form a little bit better. If it's written like this than this, I just switch the locations. So I'm going to put a star by it again. Exponential form and his logarithmic form. So as long as you consider to do that, the last thing you need to do is multiply both sides by -1. After the first step in number 10, looks like we could switch the forms again. Now, 8 and 9, we switched from exponential form to logarithmic form, and in 10, we're going to switch from logarithmic form to exponential form. So to make this go away, we need to switch these two. And this one's not quite as straightforward to finish, but the logarithm parts are finished. You could multiply both sides by a 5. That way you don't have fractions. You could take away an x from both sides, and you could undo times with divide. The hardest step there really should be the considering switching the forms. But that is now 3 questions in a row. Switching the forms was kind of the key to make it all fall into place. Number 11, after we divided both sides by 4. Now, again, you guys may feel a little rusty here. Remember, natural log just means log base e. So if you're not super comfortable with that, just take an extra step and make it say log base e. These are saying the same thing. But switch the form. This would now say e to the 3rd equals 2x, and then finish by dividing both sides by 2. And for a 5th question in a row, it's in logarithmic form. Exponential form would look like this. And if you consider doing that, then you are probably in good shape, because the rest is just undoing a +3 and undoing a ×2. So I know we need to go back and do that question 7, but I just wanted you to see that if you can remember how to switch the forms and you consider it in every single question, that's going to do most of the work for you. Yes, there's some other algebra stuff, distributing, undoing add, subtract, multiply, divide, expanding and condensing, multiplying both sides by a denominator to get rid of fractions. Yes, there's other algebra stuff that's going to get mixed in, but for the logarithm piece, switching the forms was practically the only thing I did in those. Now, before I go back and work question 7, one thing I mentioned a minute ago is that it is perfectly likely that you could have worked 1 or 2 of these differently than me. Your answer could look a lot different, and it may still be perfectly fine. That's very inconvenient for me when I have to grade your quizzes and tests, because when you get an uncommon looking answer, I have to investigate and see if it actually works or not. But for you, don't just assume that you missed some of these questions because your answer looked different. What you should do here in a minute is, if you got an answer, let's say this is the answer that you got and I got something different, or it looks different. Remember that you can store. Now, this is not something that you'll get to do on the quiz or the test. Those will be no calculator. But you can store that in for x. That's what I got. And if it makes the original equation true, then it is perfectly fine. So this was supposed to make natural log of 2x plus 3 equal 2. So even if your answer looks different, but it makes that be 2, then it's still fine, and you would still get full points. And if it doesn't equal 2, then you need to try to figure out what you actually did incorrectly, and if you can't find it, then you'll need to ask me to look at it and help you out here in just a minute. Okay, so all that being said, number 7 is one that those tools just didn't work on. If we go through our list, this is not in the right structure to switch forms. This is not quite exponential form. It's certainly not logarithmic form. There's no log. I can't just expand or condense like I did in number 10. I can't start off by undoing add, subtract, multiply, or divide like I did in some of the others. So one of the most unusual steps, but when you need it, is to take the log of both sides, or the natural log of both sides. Completely your choice. You got to do it to both sides to keep the equation balanced. But the reason that this is helpful is because this is what it makes logarithms so strong. If it becomes an exponent on something you're taking the log of, the exponent can come down out front. The exponent can come down out front. And while this still is going to take a couple more steps, that's significantly better, because at least the variable I'm solving for is not stuck up in an exponent. It's down out of the exponent, and now we can rely on our other algebra knowledge. So to finish up here, remember natural log of 3 is just a number, natural log of 2 is just a number. I could distribute this number, so at least I don't have parentheses. If I'm solving for x, I'm going to want everything on one side, all the x stuff on one side, all the constants on another side. And then this step concerns me a little bit, because if I say, hey, just do this, I'm confident that all of you can do it. But in calculus, this comes up a lot, and you don't usually get a hint. So how am I supposed to solve this for x equals from this mess? Very good. You can factor out a GCF. Both of these have an X, so you can factor it out. GCF is one of the easiest factoring types, if not the easiest. But in higher level mathematics, no one's going to tell you, hey, you need to factor out a GCF. You need to see to do it on your own. If you factor it out, then you can finish by undoing times with divide. Now, your answer is going to look different if you did the log of both sides instead of the natural log of both sides. But again, it would still count as long as it's equivalent. If you aren't sure today, store it in your calculator. Make sure that it solves the original equation. And if you are not sure or it's not, then please ask me to look at your paper, since there is certainly time today. But this is a pretty short handout. I'm not trying to get you guys to get a ton more practice. You did a ton of practice before. I'm trying to help you see what things you may have forgotten, what properties you may be rusty on. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of a shortcut to knowing what you need to review. Now, of course, what you should do is try to aim for 100 on the quiz, which is on Thursday, even though it'll be worth less and it will be a minor grade. And of course, that will still be good for your grade, but if you come in and make 100 on that or close to 100 on that, then you'll have very little work to do to study for the test, where it will count as a 50-point major assignment. So, last thing before I'll let you go here, or work on what you need to work on. 93 is the only assignment that I'm asking for on Thursday. It's the book assignment that we did in the other classroom when we got kicked out. It's a few weeks old. I actually kind of forgot about it, and a few people asked me about it, and I did want to give you points for that. So, as always, I'd recommend you go ahead and just turn it in the Google Classroom. That way, if you forget it, you don't get late credit or whatever. But that's the only thing I will ask for on Wednesday as far as homework, classwork, points. But all of those things are things listed here on the agenda, are things that you might consider looking back at. So on today's practice quiz, if it was the change of base, expanding and condensing you struggled with, you might want to look at 92, those notes, or the practice you did in 93. Maybe even redo some of those. If it's the solving equations, you might look at where we went over that in 94, or where you got up to practice in 95. So that's why I had it all typed up for you. Okay, first, sorry, I kind of just flew along here. Was there any questions, any of these you want me to go more in depth on, or any specific questions y'all have you want clarification on? Okay. Okay, so if you need to study for your quiz on Thursday, you have about exactly 30 minutes of class time, so that would put a good dent in that. Making sure that you know where 93 is in your binder at the very least. If not, turning it in the Google Classroom would be a good idea. If there's any questions you have specifics on, you want me to look at your paper, I would be happy to do that for you. But you've got 30 minutes to chip away at all that stuff, and then outside of that, you'll need to study as homework, I guess.